Okay, so guys, this is just a really quick thing we're putting at the beginning of this video. Forgot to film it, so sorry about the audio quality. But if you guys are interested in buying presets for any of the colour grades we do in our videos, we've put together a preset pack. We're going to try and put together a few more. We're going to put up a vote up here, one of the top corners, on prices, what you guys would pay for a preset pack of probably around 8 presets, something like that. So if you guys are interested in buying presets, just vote up there how much you guys are willing to pay for 8 presets so we can get an idea of what you guys want. And then also, if you do want to buy a preset, we're going to be selling them through our Instagram. So as we say later on in the video, our Instagrams will be linked down below, so don't forget to just send us a direct message on Instagram if you want to purchase a preset pack. But without any further ado, let's get straight into today's video.
Yo guys, and welcome back to another video. Now today's video is going to be showing you guys how to make some photos like this, some Photoshop art similar to Visuals of Julius. So these are some of his photos. I'm going to show you his feed. Be sure to check him out. Go ahead, give him a follow. What I'll be doing is showing you how to make some kind of photos similar to this one over here, kind of like a fantasy world that you can do in Photoshop. This is also a similar style to Kellan's world or Kellan's world, however you want to call him. This is his account here. So as you can see, lots of Photoshop art going on, stuff like this, fancy kind of things. So I'm going to be showing you guys how you can do stuff like that using stock images that you can find online. Okay, so I will say before I start the video, go ahead and check out my Instagram. It's Matthew_GKB, and these are some of the photos I've posted recently, so that'd be really cool if you guys could check that out. Okay, so as well as checking out my account, it would be great if you guys could go ahead and check out Sebastian as well. That's Sebastian_JWB. This is my brother's account. As you can tell, he's got a lot more followers than I do, but he posts some similar stuff. So this is the kind of photo that we're going to be editing today. A bit of Photoshop manipulation, some Photoshop art, which he also posts as well as me. Okay, so without any further ado guys, let's get straight into today's video. Okay, so this is the photo that I'm going to be showing you guys how to make today. It's a similar style to Visuals of Julius and Kellan's world. So what I've done is I've put this all together in Photoshop, a combination of lots of different images that you can get online for stock, and then I've put it into Lightroom and color graded it so we can get this final look here. Okay, so now what we're going to do is head into Photoshop and make this image. Make sure you make your file, your canvas size 1080 by 1350. That means that it'll be optimum size for Instagram. That's the size that you can post it at. You can get your stock photos. A good website that I recommend to you guys to use is unsplash.com. I'm going to go onto the website now to show you guys what it kind of looks like. Okay, so this is Unsplash. It's a really cool website where you guys can download free images that you can use in your Photoshop edits if you really want to. But when you download a photo, so let's say we wanted to use this one, you can click the download button here and then it'll download it. But it's really nice if you guys can credit the photo, maybe tag them in the photo, your final edit on Instagram, so they can get a little bit of credit for the photo that they took. Because after all, you are using other people's photos. But you can go ahead and use any of these photos on here to go ahead and make your own edits. Okay, so once you have your new document, the first thing we're going to do is import some background photos. These are the photos that we're going to use to start our image off. Okay, so the first image that I downloaded was this one here. We've got a mountain in the background, a nice sunset sky, and it's going to work really well with what I want to do. It's always a good idea before you start making these photos, just kind of have a rough idea in your head of what you want it to look like. Maybe draw something down on a piece of paper, or plan something out in your head at least. Okay, so the second thing that I wanted to do is I wanted to make sure I had a nice foreground going on where I had a hill at the front and maybe someone standing at the center of the image. Okay, so the next thing I decided that I wanted within this image was a nice background. Obviously we've got that here, and then I wanted a nice foreground, maybe some rolling hills and someone standing at the center of the image. So after I had planned that rough idea out, I decided to go ahead and look for a hill kind of photo on Unsplash, and this is what I found. This worked really quite well, and as you can see, it doesn't really blend very well with this top image. So the first thing that I decided to do for this one is place it down here at the bottom, and then what we're going to do is we're going to use the mask tool just to kind of get rid of the sky here and see if we can blend these two images together. Okay, so this here is the final version when I've masked it all out, so I can show you guys what I actually did. So I masked it all out here, and this is what the final image looked like. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you actually how I went about doing that. Okay, so the first thing I decided to do was completely get rid of the sky. I did that quite simply by pressing M if you're on a Mac, or by coming up and selecting this marquee tool up here. And I got this square, and I just kind of took it around over the sky, and I came down and I clicked this button here, and that's going to introduce a mask layer for us. Now I'm going to press Command I, invert the mask, so that means that I've now masked out the sky and I've still got the hills. Okay, the next thing I decided to do was I wanted to mask out this little bit over here, this lake and this sun flare coming on, and see if I could blend this cloud with these clouds in the background here. So I did that by pressing B or coming down and selecting the brush tool and selecting black on my color down here. So once I'd selected that, I made my brush size quite small by pressing the square brackets or I come up here and I adjust the size, and I make sure the hardness is down on 0, and then I come down and I simply just brush over the area that I want to mask out. And the good thing about using a mask is if I decide I do something accidental like that, I can go ahead and I can press X, or I can come down and I can switch this. So we've got white as my first image, and I can come down and I can just paint that bit back. So that's the beauty of using a mask tool. So I'm going to press X again and continue with this. So once I've done a kind of a rough blend using the brush tool, I like to come up and press W or my quick selection tool here and just go back and select the sky. If you can do, I would suggest doing it like this, and the river over here. That means that this bit here, I can just press the B tool, that's my brush, get that back up, make my brush size larger, and quickly just mask that bit out, and press Command D or the equivalent on a PC, and there we go, you've kind of got a rough mask out of your hills. Okay, so once I've done that, this is just the original layer that I used in my actual edit, and then what I decided to do was come down below it, create a new layer by pressing this new layer button down here, clicking B again or selecting brush, and coming down to the bottom and flipping back to white. And then what I like to do is put a little bit of a glow behind the hill, see if we can blend it in a little bit better. So I can change my brush size, make it slightly larger, and kind of do this, brush in a little bit of a glow, see if I can blend the two together a little bit more, just to kind of get rid of that harsh edge that we've got going on. So once I've done that, what I decided to do was go ahead and find a photo of someone that I can put in the foreground. Okay, so for my foreground photo, I went onto Unsplash and I found this really nice photo that someone took. And of course, don't forget you can credit these people when you post your actual photo. Now, I really like this photo as it is, but of course we're doing a Photoshop edit, so the only thing that I'm really interested in this photo is this rock base here, and of course the person standing up on the little hill. So what I went ahead and I did is I clicked W, or come up here and click your quick selection tool, and then what I did is I highlighted over the rock, just run it over, and it should select pretty well. If not, you can go ahead and use the pen tool. So you can either do it like this, and then you can press Alt or Option, and that'll do your minus, and you can come ahead and deselect various sections, and there we go, you've selected the bit that you wanted. Once I'd done that, this is the photo that I had ended up with. Okay, so once you have that in there and you've gone through and you've made sure all your edges are cut down perfectly, what is often good to do is make sure your perspectives and your sizes of everything are correct. Okay, so once you've done that, this is the basics of the image all done. Okay, so the first thing that I wanted to do, the eyes of the viewer to be drawn to the center of the image, to kind of look at this guy here and then be looking back into the background at the mountain and the clouds, is kind of putting in some bushes or some trees around the edges here and blurring them out, so it kind of looks like the camera has taken the photo looking through a hedge or looking through some trees. Okay, so after coming up with that idea of focusing the viewer's attention towards the center of the image, I went and I got some of my stock images that I've downloaded before in the past, and it's basically some pine leaves which I decided to kind of layer up. I put 4 images, they're all the same ones, but I flipped them around and rotated them so you can't really tell it's the same image 4 times, and I kind of made a curved, I guess you could say, vignette out of pine leaves. So for example, that's the first one, then I put some more in either side. So I created 4 pine leaves like this. You select your image, you click Filter, scroll down to Blur, click Gaussian Blur, and then you can adjust this blur as high or as low as you want to do, and then you click OK. Okay, so after I did that, I decided that I wanted something else going on in the background. I wanted some maybe birds. You see there's quite a lot in lots of Kellan's World and Visuals of Julius's photos. So for example, if we look at this one by Kellan's World, we click on the photo, you guys can see that he's put some birds going on in the background. Okay, so what I did is I went ahead and I looked online and I downloaded some stock images of a hot air balloon, which I decided to put in the background, and as well as that, I downloaded some birds. So here is the hot air balloon, just paste that in over here, adjust it to the right size, and basically just drag and drop it into the background. And then I went ahead and I think these are the birds. I put one set up there and I put a slightly different set in the center of the image over here. Okay, so after I had pasted all of this into the image, it is a good idea at this point to kind of start thinking about what color grade you kind of want to go with to make sure everything is uniform and everything looks like it fits within the image. A vital stage in this process is lighting. I can't stress enough how important this is, because I can go ahead and I can color grade this photo and it'll still look fairly decent, but we've got to think about where the light is coming from on this photo. So a good way to do that is by looking at the imported photos that you've downloaded. The light hitting the left side of the hills over here and the shadows down on the right hand side. So the general gist of this photo is the light is coming from up here in the left, shining across, and in that case that means it will be illuminating our character on the left hand side here, and he's going to have shadows on his right hand side. And a similar thing with the rocks, we're going to put a rim of light around the edge of the rocks where the sun is going to be hitting the tip of the rocks. Okay, so the first method that I like to use when I'm lighting these images is using the Dodge and Burn tool. Over here you come ahead and you click that, And you get this nice little tool here, which basically you can adjust the size the same as you would with the brush by using the square brackets, or coming up here, and of course you can adjust the size as well. Then what you can do is, if you rub that over your image without pressing any buttons, like this, as you can see, we're lighting it up. Okay, so obviously we don't really want to be lighting up his entire body. As we said, the light's coming from the left. So what I like to do is kind of run my tool around the left side of his body, just like this, so we can illuminate the left side that we've got going on here. And then what you can also do is come up and you can click Alt or Option on your computer, and that will essentially give you the reverse, which means you can make the image darker by doing the same thing. As you can see, if we rub over the image over here, it makes it a lot darker. However, because we're doing dodge and burn, it's kind of making the image look really quite contrasty. It's an alright thing to do, but I wouldn't do it too much. Okay, so what I like to do is I like to create a new layer by pressing the new layer button down here, pressing Command J as you would on a Mac. And then I like to make a clipping mask by pressing Alt, and then you get this little downwards arrow, and just by pressing click. That means that everything that I apply to this image will only cover this little cutout of this person here. Okay, so the first thing that I decided to do was just make the image as a whole slightly darker, and I did that by basically just getting my brush, pressing B, coming down, selecting black on here, and then we just rub it all over the image. Now, if I left the blending mode to normal, and I left it on 100% as it comes out when you do it originally, of course you're going to turn your character into a silhouette. Once you've covered your image with a little bit of black paint, what I like to do is come up and select my blending options and scroll down to this selection down here. Now, usually use soft light, but as you can see, it's looking a little bit weird and a little bit strange, and of course it's a little bit too dark. Now what I like to do is bring down my opacity. I'm going to put it back to what it was. It was about 38-39%. Then the next thing I decided to do was start focusing on where the actual shadows of this character are going to be. So I did the same technique again, created a new layer, made a clipping mask, got a brush, put it onto black, and then I started brushing in the areas that I thought there should be more shadows. So I did that, added in some more shadows on his back over here, just to make sure it's looking quite good. So we're going to put the highlights in by doing the same technique. We're going to create a new layer, create a clipping mask, press B or come down and click our brush tool, and then we're going to scroll down and we're going to change this so our foreground color is white. And basically it's a similar thing. We're going to brush in our highlights. We're going to select soft light, and you can change your opacity depending on how you want the image to look. Okay, so now I've done the lighting on our character in the foreground. What I decided to do was add a little bit of lighting or some flares going on in the background of the image. So I did that by creating this new layer here. Didn't make this one a clipping mask. I just basically, if I turn the layer on, I've still got it in soft light, the opacity on 4, and as you can see, if you look down here, I used different colors. I used orange for the sunset over here and pink as well in the sky. Okay, so now I decided it was time to light our hot air balloon. Everything else is almost done, so once we've done this, we can basically start with our color grading. So I decided to add a little bit of lighting, similar method, create a new layer, put some lighting on the left hand side and some shadows on the right hand side, exactly the same as I did down here. Okay, so after I'd done this, I thought it's looking pretty decent, but I do feel like we need a little bit more of a flare going on over here, or at least to accent where the sun is light enough in the sky that we can get this kind of contrast on our character. So what I did is I came down, I pressed new layer, or you can press Command J. Then I clicked B, or come down and select our brush tool, come down and select white as our foreground color, change our brush size to fairly large, and make sure our hardness is on 0. Come up to here where we think the light is coming from and simply click once over here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to change my foreground color to black. Click down here with the black just like that, so we can see a little bit of shadows down here and highlights up here. And then what I did is I came up and I selected my opacity and I brought that down to 65%. So this is the final look that I got after I did that. Now, as I mentioned beforehand, I wanted to make sure these leaves kind of act as a vignette so we can focus our attention on the center of the image here. So before we move on, I am going to add some more lighting to these leaves. So I'm going to do this by adding some highlights to the edge, the rim of the leaves over here, and then adding some shadows in these top corners and these bottom corners down here. So I'm going to do that exactly the same method. I'm going to come up above these leaves, so these are the leaves layer here. We're going to create a new layer and create a clipping mask. Then what we're going to do is a similar method, click B or come up and select our brush tool. Make our brush size pretty large this time. We're going to want to go for about a size like this. Make sure your hardness is on 0 at this point and come down and set your foreground color to white. Make sure your blend mode is still on normal at the moment. We can change that if we want to in a second. Then all we're going to do is put our brush in the center of the image and click once like that. If you've done that, you can come down and change your foreground color to black. And we're going to do the same thing, click a couple of times, paint around the rims or the inside of the leaves with black to kind of get that bit of contrast going on. And as you can see now, we've kind of got a natural vignette. So I'm going to put this onto the actual one that I did for the image, and that's what I decided to go with. Now for this blend mode, I put it into overlay because, as you can see, soft light still looks a bit hazy, looks a little bit misty, and it's not looking quite right. So for this one, just play around, see which one works better. For this one, I decided overlay works a little bit better. So what I like to do is do a little bit of preliminary color grading in Photoshop and then do our final edit and export it all out of Lightroom. So the first thing that I decided to do was make sure my foreground here, my hills, blend in with the background a little bit better, and I'm going to do that by changing the hue and saturation of the hills. So what I did is I created a new layer by coming down and clicking this adjustment tool section down here, and we're going to scroll up and we're going to click hue and saturation. Now for this, we're going to have to make sure this is also a clipping mask. We're going to do the same again, click Alt, make sure you've got this downwards arrow, click, and there we go, we've now got a clipping mask on the layer below it. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to adjust the hue and saturation kind of more towards the pink sides, the magenta, so we can kind of get a little bit more of that effect on the hills. Not too much, not too obvious, just to make sure it blends a little bit better. Something like -14 looks fairly alright for this photo. Then what we're going to do is we're going to work on the sky a little bit more and on our hot air balloon, then our leaves, and then we're basically ready to go into Lightroom. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to focus on our hot air balloon. I wouldn't say it's the best fit that we can get, so what I like to do is do the same again, come down onto our hot air balloon layer, select our adjustment layers and scroll up to hue and saturation, make sure it's a clipping mask, this one's going to do it automatically, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to adjust this hue panel and scroll it along and see which color grade fits best. So once you've done that, your image is basically done with your hot air balloon, and as you can see, if I turn it off and on, it fits a lot better into the image. Okay, so the final thing we're going to do is we're going to change the color of this bright green pine leaves in the background because it really does clash with the rest of the image, and we're also going to change the exposure, and we're going to use a curves adjustment layer just to make sure this fits a little bit better into the image. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to add a curves layer. We can do the same thing again, click on our layer of these leaves down here, click the adjustment layers and scroll up to our curve section. Once you click on that, you're going to get a new layer like this. Again, make sure it's a clipping mask and only apply to the layer below. Once you've done that, what we're going to do is we're going to adjust it to make this kind of curved panel here. That means that we're going to make it a little bit darker so it blends in so your eyes are not drawn to the leaves, and make sure your eyes are drawn into the image. We're going to do that by bringing up the shadows a little bit so it's not too contrasty, and then we're going to bring down the brightness of the image by bringing down the midtones and make it less vibrant. Okay, so then the final thing we're going to do on this image before we go into Lightroom is we're going to come down and we're going to do a hue and saturation layer again, so the same thing again, and make sure it's a clipping mask. And once we've got that, we're going to adjust this to make sure we can choose a color that best fits with this image. So I'm thinking more of a teal kind of look, more towards the teal kind of look, something around here, a little bit cooler to kind of counteract the warm sunset. Would be quite nice. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to export this image as a PNG file, and we're going to go into Lightroom. Here is our image that we've taken out of Photoshop. I've imported it into Lightroom, and now what we're going to do is go ahead and add a color grade to this image. So you should usually find with this Photoshop art, once you've imported it into Lightroom, we shouldn't have to do too much around here with the highlights and exposure and stuff, because that should all have been mainly done in Photoshop when we added our highlights and our shadows. So I'm going to come down to my tone curve. Now I usually do a nice S curve, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to click my 3 points, one at the bottom, center, and one at the top. This can help me isolate the shadows, midtones, and highlights. And the first thing I like to do with all of my images is add a little bit of a fade by selecting this bottom point and then just dragging it up a little bit. Then I'm going to make sure it's a little bit brighter just by bringing this up a little bit. And I think maybe that as well, bring up the shadows, make it a little bit brighter. Okay, so then what I usually find is with these Photoshop edits, most of our edit will be done in this hue, saturation, and luminance panel down here. And after we've done this, the image should be complete. So the first thing I like to do is by adjusting the reds, is just doing a simple rough, pulling it from left to right to see what works and what works best. Now I don't want the image to look too pink, so what I am going to do is correct it a little bit by bringing it up quite high on this one. I think we're going to leave it at about +70, +80, just to get a little bit more yellows and oranges in the hills over here to bring it back to normality. Then I'm going to do the same again with the oranges. I'm going to drag it to the left and drag it to the right. Now I'm looking at the sky and I'm thinking we don't want some greens in the sky, so we're not going to go to the right. We're going to bring it down to the left towards those pinks to get that nice kind of pink sunset, and I'm thinking -34 is looking pretty decent. Yellows, we can do the same again, drag it to the right and drag it to the left. Now I do not like that. If we drag it onto the left, our sky looks far too flat. We haven't got any interest going on in the sky, so we're not going to leave it down that nice peach colour. We're going to bring it up, but we don't want it too vibrant, so I'm not going to do too much of the yellows, I don't think. I think I'm going to leave them at about +5. +8, that should do. I think we've got a nice little bit of yellow clouds going on over here in the background. And what we're going to do is we're going to scroll down to the greens. Most of our greens will probably be in these leaves up here, so I'm thinking I'm going to bring these up a little bit not too much. It's not really doing too much to the image. I'm going to leave it at about plus 25. And what I'm going to do is again put it to the left and then put it to the right. Now I quite like that on the right. We're bringing it more cooler and more to the blues, which I quite like, so I'm going to leave it at about plus 60. I think I'm going to bring my blues down a little bit towards the teal side so we can get a kind of a little bit of a teal and orange look into the image, but not too far. I'm going to leave it, I think, at about plus 10, plus 11, but I'm going to bring that one up to 100 just to get a nice bit of pink going on up here, not doing too much. Next thing we're going to do now is come down to our saturation panel, and I'm looking at this image and I'm thinking it is very saturated in our reds, oranges and yellows, especially on the hills around here, and it's looking a little bit bright and a little bit too vivid for me, so I am just going to bring all three of these down a little bit. In my personal opinion, you can make it everything really saturated. Of course, you want to incorporate your own style into these images and see what you're going to get out of it. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring the luminance of Aqua up to 100. That's just to accent the highlights that I did in Photoshop, just to make sure my vignette's working pretty well. Now the next thing I'm going to do is come down to the split toning section, and what I like to do is put my saturation for both of them up to about 11 or 12, just so I can get a rough idea of what's going on. I'm looking at this and I know that my highlights are going to be on this side a little bit more, so I'm going to drag this around just to get roughly what I think, and I'm looking at that and I'm saying that's looking pretty nice at the moment. Then my shadows, again, I think we need some blues in our shadows, so I'm going to do a similar kind of thing with my shadows. Now what you can do as well as dragging this along here, so I'm going to go with 214, but what you can do is come down and click Alt or Option on your computer, and that will show you the color that you are actually selecting as you're scrolling through, which is kind of a nice thing to do. So once you've done that, select it. So I'm going to show you now before and after, turn off the split toning and turn it on. And I think that is basically it with the image. What I will do is add a tiny bit of sharpening, not too much. I don't want it to look too sharp. And then I'm going to add a little bit of noise reduction because this is a bit of a fantasy image. Everything's going to be quite soft and laid back. Then what I'm going to come down is my vignetting. I think I'm going to add a little bit of a vignette going on just to make it a little bit darker around the edges. So what I'm now going to do is I'm going to show you the before and after. So press the backslash, that gives us the before, and then again that gives us the after. The image did look quite nice as it was, but once you put it into Lightroom, everything looks much more uniform and fits much better. Make sure you can tag the people that you use these photos of. It's really quite nice if you get some credit, and they would probably like to see what you've done with their photo. So it'd be really nice if you guys could go and credit those people that you've used their photos of. Okay, so I'm going to leave that in full screen there for you guys to look at. So if you guys did enjoy this video, don't forget to check out my Instagram. That's Matthew_GKB. And of course my brothers. I'll leave the links down below in the description. And of course go ahead and check out Visuals of Julius. And of course check out Kellan's World, but you probably know who those guys are because you've come to this video. But thanks for watching guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, don't forget to smash that thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel and turn on those notifications, and we shall see you guys in the next video. Live long and prosper.